So perhaps I just begin. As always, welcome all to the third lecture of the Coming Renaissance series. Greetings to you wherever and whoever you are on this evening of mankind, where we as yet still do not know when or whence another dawn and day may break. We stand, it seems, at an unprecedented juncture, where all of a sudden everything seems to matter again, where through the veil of horror meaning begins to shine. T.S. Eliot's dictum that April is the cruelest month may prove true. Please allow me to make some announcements before I begin tonight's meditation on death. To all those of you listening or watching who call the United Kingdom your home, as you know, Her Majesty the Queen will address her nation tonight at 8 p.m. I shall therefore speak earlier than usually and keep tonight's meditation briefer. If you allow me, I would also like to mention that I am building a new free academy, an academy free from the constraints of the educational complex. The Halcyon Guild Academy, with a first course now live, to which you are cordially invited to participate. It will be a lecture series on idleness with dignity. There should be a link down there somewhere. And we'll also talk about leisure as the basis of our civilization. The course is centered around readings of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Nietzsche, Wilhelm von Humboldt, Bertrand Russell, Martin Heidegger, and Joseph Pieper. I'll link to the full course syllabus down below and over there in the chat box. Next week on Easter Sunday, where, as you know, Christians celebrate Jesus Christ's resurrection and his defeat of the sting of death, I will air a short film instead of a lecture, which was a film project between my friend Patricio Alfaro, who's a filmmaker from Chile, and myself. In that video, I'm reading an excerpt from Plato's allegory of the cave as the parable of our age, as coming into fulfillment around us. Now to the Memento Mori. What is there to say about death? It is a mere fact of life that we all have to die. Not for now, of course, but at some later point in life. And how wondrous, we are getting older and older. We are being told, at least. We are getting so old purely in terms of the quantity of years lived, that the quality of life must, of course, also automatically increase. For this is just a simple fact, just like living and existing apparently is just a fact. The horizon of death is getting pushed further and further away. Death is a mere technical problem waiting to be solved, as science fiction authors such as Harari and Kurzweil will not tire to proclaim. The future, we are told, is an open blank field, totally divided from the past. Forget the days of old. Forget what has been. Forget being. For the utopia to come will be, if not entirely deathless, then at least seamless. One's life just a straight line along which we make sense, like meaning-making machines, where we take blue or red pills, solve all kinds of unused, all anxiety entertained in a sterile planetary laboratory. With every birth, new death is born. Can there still be a good death? in an epoch which casts death out into the abstract realm of truth tables and meta problems. How cut off from that which Aristotle calls being, toti and enai, that which was being. That means that which is old. Is how cut off are we from this, of the plane on which we exist, on which we try to find a hold, a stance, that we believe that any phenomenon is just a formological problem waiting to be solved on some fantasized meta level. To consider death a technical problem with some solution in some toolbox gamifies existence and tears the horizon of meaning within which mortals are bound away from us. What clothes itself as benevolent is a force of nihilism. For being cut off from the old, from being itself, leaves mortals wounded and naked and incapable of finding their genuine future, and a home in being, a dwelling ground. And such a dwelling ground in the midst of beings in unison with being appreciates the bosom of the earth as the place of ancestry, and hence does not exploit nor destroy the earth. Without death, without a relationship with death, we are never adults. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke puts it as follows in a letter to his lover Mimi Romanelli. And I quote from Rilke: "There is death in life, and it astonishes me that we pretend to ignore this. Death, whose unforgiving presence we experience with each change we survive, because we must learn to die slowly. We must learn to die. That is all of life." In another letter, Rilke writes, "Believe me, death is our friend. Our closest friend, perhaps the only friend, who can never be misled by our ploys and vacillations. And I do not mean that in the sentimental romantic sense of distrusting or renouncing life. No. Death is our friend precisely because it brings us into absolute and passionate presence with all that is here, that is natural, that is love. Life always says yes and no simultaneously. To become a true adult means to cultivate a friendship with one's death, then. And it is also this radical finitude, the other side of being, the echo of absence, the irresolvable, which has no neat, childish, game-theoretical solution to it. It is this other side of being, death, that lets shine forth the world in its true beauty and our responsibility to safeguard beings and the earth. Heidegger's being and time can be understood as an extended, long meditation of the Memento Mori, a reminder to the modern subject that makes itself the ground of all beings, that it is still mortal. Heidegger responds to Descartes' dictum cogito ergo sum, which posits the being of the subject as the self-certain principle of all that is, with the formula, and this is Heidegger's response, sum moribundus. I am only insofar I am towards my death. Being has meaning. My being has meaning only because I am towards my death. That is to say, the only certainty the human being has is the uncertainty of the hour of his death. Of course, the late modern subject, at its utmost maximum, who now longs for nothing more than retiring the human being once and for all under the guise of transhumanism and posthumanism, this late modern subject senses truly absolute certainty of death and responds with ever shriller appetite for formatted experience in hypermoral indignation. By being towards death, Dasein comes into touch with the intensity of being, with its inherent withdrawal, which throws open and gives rise to Dasein's world. And that is to say, that the horizon world is the horizon against which beings appear as meaningful. Without death, without this finite horizon and intensity, we find no meaning. The Memento Mori means not only to remember that you yourself are mortal, it also reminds us of those who came before us, who have died so that we could be. The Queen tonight will say the following in her address to the nation. I hope in the years to come, everyone will be able to take pride in how they responded to this challenge. And those who come after us will say that the Britons of this generation were as strong as any, that the attributes of self-discipline, of quiet good human resolve, and of fellow feeling still characterize this country. The Queen's call to ancestry and to responsibility shows that we have, for those who came before us and who come after us, this deep responsibility. But also this profound responsibility means a profound and genuine gratitude for existence and for the gift of being, rather than simply taking it as a mere fact waiting to be optimized. Those who are dying a good death, how can a good death be? In the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel argues, we need to bury the dead so that we fulfill a divine duty for the deceased and leave him not to nature's destruction. The burial of the dead and the bosom of the earth is necessary to fulfill divine law. To be on the earth is not a mere fact. To be human is not a mere fact. It is a perfect duty to oneself and others to become human, and to be on the earth means to grasp what it means to be human. We need to think, first and foremost, the dead must be buried not because of some archaic ritual which has no meaning. The dead must be buried in order to maintain the ethical order, Sittlichkeit, and divine law. The dead is to be wed to the bosom of the earth, as Hegel says, by his family. For on the earth there is the reign of actuality, of Wirklichkeit in thought and action, of which the dead no longer has any part. To awaken the dead from the living, for example, by digital copies in virtual reality, means to unsettle so fundamentally and horribly the original equilibrium, balance between the divine and the human, that we yet not know which consequences, which terrors this willful act of unbalancing will bring upon us mortals. And I quote from Hegel, death, if that is what we want to call this non-actuality, is the most dreadful thing, and to hold fast what is dead requires the greatest force. This greatest force against what is dead we are employing every day at ever greater expense, at ever greater cost, when we're trying to eradicate death, without there ever being the possibility of a good death, of a return to this primordial balance and equilibrium. As we try to run from death or control death or solve it because it's nothing but a technological problem, death's negativity comes back to haunt us as our life is reduced, as truth and beauty wane. Hegel continues, but the life of the spirit is not the life that shrinks from death and keeps clear of devastation. It is the life that endures death and preserves itself in it. Spirit gains its truth only when, in absolute disintegration, it finds itself. Empty is our world, a vast growing desert of enframing, where everything is challenged to stand ready to be exploited. But as the new Atlantis, which Francis Bacon envisioned after all, begins to sink around us, we may begin to envision again the Garden of Athens and another world that Heidegger called Gefeiert, the gathering of four regions, earth, mortals, sky, gods. In Building, Dwelling, Thinking, Heidegger writes, Earth is the serving bearer, blossoming and fruiting, spreading out in rock and water, rising up into plant and animal. When we say Earth, we are already thinking of the other three along with it. But we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. The sky is the vaulting path of the sun, the chorus of the changing moon, the wandering glitter of the stars, the years, seasons, and their changes. The light and dusk of day, the gloom and glow of night, the clemency and inclemency of the weather, the drifting clouds and blue depth of the ether. When we say sky, we are already thinking of the other three along with it, but we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. The divinities are the beckoning messengers of the Godhead. Out of the holy sway of the Godhead, the God appears in his presence or withdraws into his concealment. When we speak of the divinities, we are already thinking of the other three along with them. But we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. The mortals are the human beings. They are called mortals because they can die. To die means to be capable of death as death. Only man dies, and indeed continuously, as long as he remains on the earth, under the sky, before the gods. When we speak of mortals, we are already thinking of the other three along with them. But we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. The simple oneness of the four we call the fourfold. Mortals are in the fourfold by dwelling, but the basic character of dwelling is to spare, to preserve, to save, to protect, to keep. Mortals dwell in the way they preserve the fourfold in its essential being. Accordingly, the preserving that dwells is fourfold. Mortals dwell in that they save the earth, taking the world in the old sense, taking the word of saving, retten, in the old sense of lessing, where saving does not only mean to snatch something from a danger. To save really means to set something free into its own presencing, into its own essence. To save the earth is more than to exploit it or even wear it out. Saving the earth does not master the earth and does not subjugate it, which is merely one step from spoliation. Mortals dwell in that they receive the sky as sky. They leave to the sun and the moon their journey, to the stars their courses, to the seasons their blessing and their inclemency. They do not turn night into day, nor day into a harassed unrest. Mortals dwell in that they await the divinities as divinities. In hope, they hold up to the divinities what is unhoped for. They wait for intimations of their coming, and do not mistake the signs of their absence. They do not make their gods for themselves, and do not worship idols like themselves. In the very depth of misfortune, they wait for the wheel that has been withdrawn. Mortals dwell in that they initiate their own nature, their being capable of death as death, into the use and practice of this capacity, so that there may be a good death. To initiate mortals into the nature of death in no way means to make death the goal. Nor does it mean to darken dwelling by blindly staring toward the end. Heidegger here reminds us of what once was, not to return to it, to some nostalgic past, which would be impossible. But we need to remember what was, what has been, in order to find again a genuine human future, for there to be a good death again. There may come a day where we sing love songs to the dead, rather than humming the false tune of self-idolatry and sterile deathlessness in a planetary lab. Thank you very much for listening. See you next week.